And what we're seeing is something of a bait and switch, that Trump had said this would be free of charge, this would be gratis, and now taxpayers are going to be on the hook for at least some part of it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. So today on the show, President Trump's East Wing ballroom revamp was supposed to be privately funded. So why are Republicans now asking taxpayers to be on the hook for $1 billion? Plus, we have an exclusive look inside the Department of Homeland Security, where leaders have been reportedly clashing over how to carry out President Trump's mass deportation agenda, how some officials staked their whole career to defy the orders. Up first, though, Senate Republicans released an immigration and border patrol funding bill this week. Included in that legislation is an earmark for the quote-unquote East Wing modernization project to the tune of $1 billion. Now, when the White House first announced the project last July, President Trump said that construction of the new ballroom would cost $200 million and be funded by private donors. Comcast Corporation, by the way, the parent company of NBC Universal, is one of those donors. Then, after tearing down the East Wing, President Trump announced on Truth Social that the ballroom would now cost $300 to $400 million with, quote, zero taxpayer funding. Now, GOP leadership says that the new security enhancements for the ballroom have more than double the cost. Again. So is Congress going to allow the expensive project to move forward? And why is it that taxpayers are suddenly on the hook for what the president had said previously was privately funded and/or a gift? For this, I want to bring in Peter Nicholas, senior White House reporter for NBC News. Hi, Peter.
Hi, good to be with you.
Great to have you. Okay, so I kind of laid it out here, but the president said, listen, we're going to be building this ballroom. It's a huge reconstruction project. It's for the benefit of the American people, for the people's house. And it is funded, by the way. It is paid for. I have raised all the money. It is privately funded. Taxpayers won't have to pay $1 of this reconstruction project. Then, after the shooting at the White House Correspondents Dinner in Washington, D.C., a group of Republican senators introduced legislation to fund the ballroom for $400 million. Why did those senators say that the shooting made this switch from private to now public funding necessary?
Well, the lawmakers want to essentially give congressional approval to this project. A federal judge has intervened and tried to stop the project, saying that Congress's authorization is needed. So one bonus to the congressional effort to fund this would be to provide the authorization that would do away with a lawsuit that has become an obstacle to this project. So that's one aspect of it. The other is some members of Congress are saying that it would be better if this is publicly funded. Lindsey Graham is a sponsor of a separate piece of legislation that would fund the ballroom. And he says that the money that Trump raised privately could be used for China and dishware, things like that, but that taxpayers would essentially pay for it, which is how major renovations at the White House have been done in the past. Trump, in selling the ballroom and making a case for it, had said this would be entirely free to taxpayers. It wouldn't cost anything. But of late, it's emerged that that's not entirely the case, that there are security improvements, enhancements. He wants the building to be drone-proof, bulletproof, potentially even missile-resistant. And those upgrades and those enhancements cost money, and it looks like taxpayers are going to be on the hook for it.
So how is the president then spinning this? Because he's looking like he's been telling a tall tale that it's going to be privately funded.
Well, he is emphasizing that the ballroom proper will be privately funded, that money is that was raised privately, and then he himself contributed to, that will be used to underwrite, finance the project, at least the ballroom piece of it. He's not talking so much about these security enhancements, but the White House issued a statement saying that it's open to accepting this public money for those security enhancements above ground and below ground.
And now we're looking at $1 billion in this reconciliation bill that's going to go towards the East Wing reconstruction. So what is that going to entail? Why is the price tag so huge?
Well, Democrats are asking the same question, and they're saying that seems like too much money. We spoke to Chris Coons, a Democratic senator from Delaware, and also we spoke to Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut, another Democrat, who said that they're not going to support this funding measure. And what we're seeing is something of a bait and switch, that Trump had said this would be free of charge, this would be gratis, And now taxpayers are going to be on the hook for at least some part of it, I guess the security enhancements. So this is going to turn into be a showdown in Congress where both Republicans and Democrats may have an up or down vote on this ballroom funding measure.
I mean, it's not just Democrats that have been criticizing the Reconstruction Project at the White House. We've heard from some Republicans as well. So can they get it across the finish line? Can they get this funding?
I think that's a really good question. I don't think we know for sure. They have the benefit that the 60-vote threshold, it won't be needed here. This is what's called, in Washington jargon, a reconciliation measure. A simple majority of votes, 51 votes in the Senate is all that's needed. And Republicans do control the Senate. But as you mentioned, some Republicans have been critical of this project. And at a time when many Americans are feeling strapped financially, when gas prices are averaging more than $4 a gallon, this is a hard sell to go back to constituents and say, we approve public money that's part of this ballroom project. And I think what the White House talking point here would be, well, this is for the president's safety, for the safety of future presidents. These security enhancements will make it create a nice, safe, large space for presidents to conduct state dinners and things like that without fearing the sort of incident we saw at the White House Correspondents Dinner at a local Washington, D.C. hotel where gunmen entered the premises. So this will be part of the pitch that the president and supporters in Congress will make, is that the ballroom, with its security provisions, will be something that future presidents can benefit from for many years.
It's one thing to be critical of the president. It's another thing to actually vote against him. And Josh Hawley, Rick Scott, Rand Paul, they've all said they don't think that this ballroom should be publicly funded. But the question is, are they actually going to pull the lever against the president and against this funding?
That's a really good question. We'll have to go back to them. The president can be pretty persuasive. And when the president puts his foot down and says he wants something, Republicans, to this point, have generally been very compliant. But Trump, as I mentioned, his poll numbers are dropping, and it remains to be seen whether he has the same kind of clout in Congress to get something over the finish line, particularly since midterm elections are coming up. And this might be a hard vote for Republicans to explain why they appropriated all this money for a ballroom.
In talking about this legal quagmire when it comes to ballroom reconstruction, it is still an open question as to whether or not they need congressional approval authorization for the construction of the East Wing. It's heading to a federal appeals court, and a decision is not expected at the earliest until mid-June or so. So what is happening right now with the construction of the East Wing? Construction
is continuing. While this case plays out, the ballroom is still being built. A judge had stayed construction, but the administration appealed, and construction has been allowed to go forward. But what's unclear is if Trump cannot get congressional approval, if an appeals court decides congressional approval was needed, if the ballroom is just stopped in progress, and then what we have is a big hole in the ground. So that is one alternative, one outcome. But it seems like Congress, if it wants to, can sidestep that problem by approving the ballroom or approving some use for it. That's the legal step that Judge Leon, a U.S. District Judge in Washington, said was needed and wasn't taken.
And to be clear here, the ballroom wouldn't even be done until the end of the president's term.
Yeah, I believe Trump has said that it would be completed before the end of the term. But, the legal hurdles have pushed back that timeline and thrown it into jeopardy.
Peter Nicholas, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
So the Department of Homeland Security has been a huge source of controversy for the Trump administration. There have been a lot of questions raised about everything from their immigration policies to ICE deportation strategies to investigations about contracts and ad campaigns and allegations, of course, of an affair. But internally, there have also been a lot of tensions. Leaders have allegedly privately clashed over how to carry out the president's immigration agenda, including how to accomplish the president's goal to deport 1 million people during his first year back in office. And we are now getting an exclusive inside look at the fiery tensions among immigration officials from NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, who has detailed them in her new book, Undue Process, the inside story of Trump's mass deportation program. which is out now, by the way. And Julia is joining me now. Hi, Julia.
Hi.
I think as we are looking from the outside in with this administration and when it comes to immigration enforcement, there is this sense that everybody inside this administration is in lockstep with the president and how it is he wants to institute his demands, right? 1 million deportations in the first year in office, a goal he has not reached, by the way. But in your reporting and in your book, you actually detail that was not the case early on in this administration. And there was a particular blow up you detail in your book about how to institute some of the president's demands. Can you walk us through that blow up?
Yeah, it was fascinating. So this is early on. So we're talking February 2025, and the numbers are not very high. Trump promised shock and awe.
So a month into his administration.
Yeah, and he promised shock and awe. I mean, think about it. As journalists, we were ready, like, what's going to be the city? Where are they going to go? Where are we going to see ICE in the streets? And really, not a lot had happened. In fact, the deportations of that first month were lower than they had been under the Biden administration, in part because Biden was turning more people away at the border. Basically, they get together for this plan. This is the leaders of ICE and CBP, and they have a plan that's been blessed by Secretary Noem. They're at DHS headquarters, and it is a master plan for deportations is what it's called. And it instructed Customs and Border Protection, along with the Department of Defense, that's a key piece of this recipe, and ICE, to form what they were going to call the National Incident Command Center in Washington. And they would pick cities across the country where they would send immigration agents to go arrest people with prior orders of deportation. They had 700,000 of them listed with previous known addresses, and that would get them really close to their goal of 1 million deportations a year. All they had to do was go into these last known addresses without a warrant. That was the plan. They wouldn't get a warrant signed by a judge. They'd just get a piece of paper signed by an ICE field office, go in and make the arrest and put them on a path to fast deportation. This seemed like the easy, no-brainer way to get to 1 million. But Caleb Vitello, who was the first ICE director, he was the ICE director at this time, and he had worked with Stephen Miller in the first Trump one. Like, he was seen as a Trump loyalist. Yeah. He raised a question in this meeting about these known addresses. He said, look, I've worked in immigration enforcement my entire career. The last known address somebody lists is often not the place they're currently living. Some of these people could have died. Some of these addresses were listed in the 80s. Some people have moved, obviously. And so you run a really high risk of going into a home of an American citizen and arresting them and putting them on a fast track for deportation. Right. He is not going to put his name on this. On the other side of the table, there are the heads of Customs and Border Protection, like Rodney Scott, who's still there. He's still the commissioner, his senior advisor, and also the deputy to Noem at the time. And Rodney Scott got so angry with Caleb Vitello that he's slamming his hands on the
Because Vitello is saying, I'm not putting my name on this.
Yeah. And he's saying, this is the way. This is the plan. And the fact that ICE isn't getting on board, that the leader of ICE is obstinate against this. They're furious about this. Rodney Scott's furious about it. Anyway, they reached such high tensions that their handlers, the people who brought them into the room in Washington, everybody kind of has these people who bring them around from place to place where they need to go. They have to clear the room because it's gotten so tense. But I've spoken to some people about what happened inside. They basically just got so heated that it was clear that they needed to leave this room. And within days, Caleb Vitello was reassigned and he was sent down to Georgia to run ICE training. And then soon they brought in Todd Lyons, who became the ICE director after that. He is also now on his way out. But it was key for me to understand that as a reporter because, like you said, we all thought they were in lockstep. Yeah. We always thought the headlines in the media were that Caleb Vitello was fired because they couldn't get the number of arrests high enough, that it was just a competency issue. We had no idea there were these major discussions about ideological differences, even among people who were vocally Trump loyalists, who had come in, who were part of this mission to get this record high deportation force. And it played out through my reporting. There were a lot of other people I talked to who had some real problems with this, and they paid the price with their careers.
How is Homeland Security, ICE, CBP, the White House, how have they responded to your reporting?
On this incident, they've actually been incredibly quiet. When I was reporting about this in the book, they just said that they won't talk about internal meetings and discussions. They did not respond to comment when I wrote an article about it for NBCNews.com earlier this week that laid it out in more detail. I did not get a response from them. And then in general on the book, there are multiple times through the book where I can explain someone might deny this. This is what this person said. Oftentimes it's from notes taken by people inside meetings.
It's interesting because as we have watched these immigration policies be instituted by the Trump administration throughout the last year and a half almost now, especially after we watched what took place in Minneapolis, for instance, and the killing of Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good, we often wondered if there were legal issues to what they were actually carrying out, right? How they were actually justifying their actions, all of these agencies. And from your reporting, it sounds as if those questions were being asked from inside the administration as well, which, as the media and as people were reviewing it from the outside, didn't necessarily see.
Yeah, it seemed like they had an army of people ready to take on those fights. But internally, even among their own lawyers, there was dissent. There's a part that I have in the book where I was able to talk to a professor who was training incoming ICE agents on the law. When I interviewed this guy was when ICE was really cracking down in D.C. So I was seeing in my own area ICE often grabbing people who were on their way making food deliveries. That was really common in D.C. And a lot of cracking car windows. We saw that a lot in Chicago of people who refused to open their door and then they would crash the car window. And so I asked this professor, what does an ICE officer need to have in order to break a car window? Is it treated like a home? Yeah. What is that like? And he said that they needed a reasonable suspicion that this person had violated immigration law. That's a lower bar than probable cause. They're not trying to establish that. But if they have a reasonable suspicion, that professor was reassigned and taken out of that job that afternoon for telling me that.
How has ICE and DHS responded to that reporting in your book? They haven't.
They have not.
Messaging has also been an issue. It sounds like there have been internal voices questioning some of the language, some of the messaging coming out of ICE and DHS as well.
Yeah, this is fascinating. There's a woman I spoke to for the book who really had a 30-year career, starting in the military, then at DHS, was a press agent. A lot of people don't understand that there are some people who even work in the press shop who are career. They were not there for any political administration. They can stay throughout. Yeah. And she was being asked by her bosses in a press release to describe the people who had just been arrested as scumbags. This is kind of language we heard a lot from Kristi Noem. They loved terms like heinous monster, scumbags. And these are people who were alleged gang members. And so she said, what if we're wrong? And she also meant the question a little more broadly. What if we're wrong about the people we're arresting?
Who did she say this to?
Her bosses, who were telling her to put the word scumbags in a press release. And she told me that she believes that's what ended up getting her fired, because just weeks later, she was given termination papers that said she was being fired for failure to authorize a press release. Now, when I spoke to people at DHS, they said she was fired for failing to do her job. But it's a question of, was it her job to include the word scumbags in a press release? And this same person, and I'm granting her anonymity, also raised a question right at the end of my reporting, which really spans 2025, of if we keep going this way, someone's going to get killed. And this is before January 26th, where we saw the shootings of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. She had a real premonition that she'd seen these things play out before. She had a long career. And she just thought, this is such a scattershot mission. We're surging into these cities. We're coming in just guns a-blazing. And she was really worried an ICE officer could get killed, a Border Patrol agent could get killed, an immigrant, an American citizen. And I thought that was a real foreshadowing of what was to come.
Julia Ainsley, the book is Undue Process, the inside story of Trump's mass deportation program. It's out now, wherever you get your books.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
Yasmin.
All right. That is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.